My name is Robert, and for 31 years I was a father. Not just a man who happened to have a child, but a father in every sense of the word, the kind who showed up, who stayed up, who gave up everything so that someone else could have more. I thought that was enough. I thought love, real love, the kind you bleed for, would come back to you. I was wrong. I know that now. But I didn't know it on the night my son asked me to leave my own living room so his father-in-law could watch the game in my chair. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I need you to understand where I came from, because without that, none of this makes sense. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, in a house where the heat sometimes didn't work in January and dinner was whatever my mother could stretch. My father was a steel worker who lost his job when I was 11 and never quite found his footing again after that. I watched him shrink. I watched a proud man become a quiet one. I swore to myself, standing in that cold kitchen watching my mother count change on the counter, that I would never let that happen to my family. I would never be that man. So I worked. I joined the electricians union at 19. I learned the trade the hard way, from the ground up, running wire in crawl spaces and attics in the middle of August when the heat was so bad you couldn't breathe. I married my wife, Carol, when I was 24. She was a school librarian with a laugh that could fill a whole room. She believed in me when I had very little reason to believe in myself. We had our son, Marcus, 3 years later, and from the moment I held that boy in my arms, everything I did for him. I built my electrical contracting business over 20 years. It wasn't glamorous. There were years we barely made payroll, years I drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it because I couldn't justify the expense of a new one. But I was honest. Every job I took, I finished. Every client I had, I kept. By the time Marcus was in high school, we had a real business, a good one, a 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood outside of Columbus, a college fund with actual money in it, security, the kind my father never had. Marcus was smart, sharp in a way that sometimes surprised me, because he hadn't had to struggle for anything. I told myself that was a good thing. I told myself I had succeeded. Plus. Looking back now, if I'm being honest with you, I think I was raising a boy who understood the price of everything and the value of nothing. But I didn't want to see that. Parents rarely do. And he went to Ohio State. Business degree. Graduated in 4 years. Came to work for the company. I was proud. Lord, I was proud. My son, sitting across from me at the conference table, talking about growth strategy and digital marketing. I felt like everything had come full circle. I felt like the cold winters and the long summers and the years of sacrifice had all been worth it. Then Carol got sick. It was a Tuesday in March when the doctor used the word lymphoma. I remember the fluorescent light in that examination room. I remember the way Carol reached over and took my hand without saying anything. I remember thinking, this is the moment everything changes. And it was. I stepped back from the business. Marcus stepped up, or so I thought. I was driving Carol to treatments, sitting in waiting rooms with paper cups of bad coffee, sleeping in a recliner next to her hospital bed because I could not stand the idea of being in our bed at home alone. Carol fought hard. She had that kind of spirit. But 16 months after the diagnosis, I lost her. I lost the best thing that had ever happened to me. And I was 62 years old, alone in a house full of her things, wondering what exactly I was supposed to do next. Marcus handled the grief the way some people do, by staying busy, by staying away. His visits dropped off. He had his life. He'd been dating a woman named Vanessa for about 2 years by then, and not long after Carol passed, he told me they were getting engaged. I met Vanessa a handful of times. She was polished, confident, and the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately assessed it. And two, her father, a man named Gerald, was a retired corporate attorney from Westerville. Old money, the kind of man who wore his status the way other men wear cologne. You could smell it before he even opened his mouth. I didn't dislike Gerald. I just didn't trust the way he looked at me, like I was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. The wedding was beautiful. I paid for a significant portion of it, because Marcus asked and I said yes, the way I always said yes. After the wedding, they moved into the house. My house. Just temporarily, they said. just until they found the right place. Just a few months. I told them, of course, you can stay. This house is big and I'm rattling around in it alone. It's good to have family around. Said. That was 14 months before the night in question. 14 months is a long time for a temporary arrangement. In that time, I learned to move quietly through my own home. I learned that the kitchen was Vanessa's domain after 6 o'clock. I learned that my study, the room where I had done the books for 30 years, where Carol used to bring me coffee on Saturday mornings, was now a storage room for their things. I learned to watch television in my bedroom because the living room had been rearranged to Vanessa's taste. My chair, a big brown leather recliner that Carol had given me for our 25th anniversary, had been pushed into the corner. It was still there. I could still sit in it. But the positioning of the room made it clear it was no longer the center of anything. I told myself it was fine. They were young, newlyweds. I was the intruder in their story, not the other way around. I made myself believe that. Then came the Sunday of the Ohio State game. Marcus's group of friends was coming over. Gerald and his wife, Patricia, were also invited. It was a casual thing, Marcus said. Just people watching football. No big deal. I came downstairs that afternoon in my own house, in my jeans and my flannel shirt, ready to watch the game the way I had watched every Ohio State game for the past 30 years. I came into the living room and the furniture had been rearranged again. The good chairs were all positioned around the television. Gerald was already seated, right in my recliner. The brown leather chair with the small tear on the left armrest from the time Marcus was 7 and tried to climb up the back of it. He was sitting in it with a glass of bourbon, legs crossed, like it had been his chair since the beginning of time. Marcus found me standing in the doorway. He came over, and I saw something in his face that I had never seen before when he looked at me. Discomfort. Not the kind that comes from doing something wrong. The kind that comes from wishing you weren't there. He pulled me slightly to the side and spoke quietly. Not quiet enough. Dad, he said, would you mind watching the game upstairs? We've kind of got a full house down here, and Gerald isn't really, he needs a little more space. It's just easier. I want you to try to understand what happened inside me in that moment. Not the anger. The anger came later. In the first second, it was something else. It was a kind of bewilderment, a short-circuiting. Because the words didn't connect. I was in my living room. I had put that paneling on those walls with my own hands. The carpet under our feet, I had laid it myself on a weekend in 1997 with Marcus sitting on the stairs watching me and handing me tools he was too small to use correctly. And my son was asking me to go upstairs. Gerald needs more space, I repeated. Dad, don't make this into something. I'm not making it into anything, I said. I just want to understand what you're saying to me. His jaw tightened. Vanessa had appeared behind him now, and she had that look on her face, the careful, pleasant look of someone who is very much in control of the situation and very much wants you to understand that. Robert, she said, and I noticed she always called me Robert, never Dad, never even a warmer version of my name. There's a perfectly good TV in the bedroom. We just thought it might be more comfortable for everyone. More comfortable for everyone. I stood there, and I translated that sentence in my head. More comfortable meant, Gerald does not want to sit next to you. Gerald finds you awkward. You are the old electrician whose son married up, and your presence in this room is an inconvenience to the image my son is trying to project. I looked past Marcus. I looked at Gerald in my chair. He wasn't even watching us. He was already talking to one of the other guests, gesturing with my bourbon glass. He'd helped himself from my cabinet, laughing at something, completely at home. And why wouldn't he be? My son had made him at home. In my home, at my expense. Nah. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said in that moment. She would have squeezed my hand and said quietly, pick your battles, Bobby. She always called me Bobby when she was trying to calm me down. But Carol wasn't there, and I was tired of picking my battles. I was tired of shrinking. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was quite a lot. I just looked at my son for a long moment. Long enough that the smile on his face started to falter. Long enough that he knew, somewhere deep down, that something had just shifted. Then I turned and I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in my flannel shirt, and I listened to the sounds of a party happening in my house. I heard Gerald laugh loudly at something. I heard the television and the crowd noise and the clink of glasses. I didn't watch the game. I didn't turn on my bedroom TV. I just sat there in the quiet and I let something settle inside me. A decision, cold and clear, as January water. I let 2 weeks pass. I want you to understand that. I didn't act in anger. I acted in clarity. I let the dust settle, Pa. I watched Marcus and Vanessa move through the house. And I watched how Gerald came over twice more in those 2 weeks, and how the house rearranged itself around him both times. I watched my son perform for his father-in-law the way a man performs when he is auditioning for something. And I began to understand that I was not a father to Marcus anymore. I was a detail, an inconvenient piece of his origin story that he was trying to redecorate around. On a Wednesday morning, I called my attorney, a man named Phil Hartley, who had handled my business contracts for 15 years. I told him what I wanted. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Robert, are you sure?" I told him I had never been more sure of anything since I put on my work boots at 6 in the morning on the first day of my apprenticeship. He said he'd draw up the papers. The next thing I did surprised even me. I called my nephew, Danny, who was 43, and had worked for my electrical company for 12 years. Solid, honest, reminded me of myself at that age. 8. I told him I wanted to have dinner, just the two of us. He could tell from my voice that it was important and he didn't ask questions. At dinner, I told Danny everything. He sat across from me with his hands around his coffee cup and he listened without interrupting, which is a rare quality in a person. When I finished, he looked at me and he said, "Uncle Bobby, what do you need me to do?" That's the kind of people the ones you build your life around ought to be. I had one more piece to put in place, something I hadn't told anyone, something Marcus didn't know I knew. In the months since he'd taken over more of the business operations, I had noticed irregularities. Small ones at first, expenses that didn't quite line up, vendor invoices for amounts that seemed high. I had been going through the books quietly for weeks. What I found was not embezzlement exactly, but it was the next closest thing. Marcus had been billing personal expenses through the company. Dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips, renovations, and this one hit me hard. Renovations to the house. My house. He had spent over $20,000 of company money making changes to my property. Changes I hadn't approved. Changes I hadn't even been fully aware of. And because the house was in my name, and the company was in my name, what he had done was legally significant in ways he had not thought through. Marcus had gotten sloppy because he thought I was finished. He thought grief had made me soft. He thought the old man upstairs, watching his bedroom television, was no longer paying attention. I had been paying very close attention. On a Friday afternoon, Phil came to the house. He brought the papers. Marcus was at the office. Vanessa was out. Phil, I signed everything at the kitchen table, the small round table where Carol and I used to have our morning coffee, the one that had been pushed into the corner since Vanessa reorganized the kitchen. I signed and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Solid. Grounded. Like myself. The papers included 3 things. First, a formal letter of notice requiring Marcus and Vanessa to vacate the property within 45 days. Second, a revision to the company partnership structure that effectively froze Marcus's operational authority pending a full financial audit. Third, a revised estate document that placed the majority of my assets into a trust managed by an independent fiduciary, with Danny named as the operational successor to the business. That evening Marcus came home. I was sitting in my recliner. I had moved it back to the center of the room that afternoon reading a book. He stopped in the doorway of the living room and looked at the chair and then at me. "Dad?" he started. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. He sat on the couch. Vanessa appeared a moment later, and I looked at her and said, "This is a conversation between me and my son. I'd appreciate a few minutes." She looked at Marcus and he gave her a small nod and she left the room, but I knew she was standing just around the corner. I told him what I had done, calmly, without raising my voice. The eviction notice, the audit, the trust restructure. I slid the folder with the papers across the coffee table and watched his face as he opened it. I watched the color leave his face the way color leaves a photograph left in the sun. "You can't do this," he said. His voice was doing something unfamiliar. It was cracking at the edges. "I've already done it," I said. "Phil filed everything this morning. Dad, this is insane. Because of one afternoon? Because of the game? Eh. No," I said. "Because of 14 months. Because of a chair that your grandfather and I picked out of a catalog and that your mother gave me as an anniversary gift that your father-in-law sat in while I was sent upstairs like a child being put to bed. Because of $20,000 of company money that you spent without my authorization. Because I taught you better than this, Marcus. And somewhere along the way, you forgot everything I taught you. And, he tried everything. He told me I was being irrational. He told me I was still grieving and not thinking clearly. He brought up his mother's name in a way that made my jaw tighten. He said, Mom would not want this. And I said, very quietly, your mother spent 16 months dying with more dignity than you have shown in a single evening. Don't tell me what she would want. That stopped him. Vanessa came in, then she had been listening, of course, and she tried a different approach. Softer, wounded. Robert, we're family. You'd really put us out on the street? I looked at her, and I thought about the Sunday afternoon and the polished smile and more comfortable for everyone, and I said, Vanessa, you've been living in my house for over a year. You've reorganized my kitchen, replaced my furniture, and rearranged my life to suit your father's comfort. You'll land on your feet. And Marcus stood up. His chair scraped back hard. He was trembling, and I could see that he was furious and frightened in equal measure, and that the frightened part was winning. I'll contest the estate changes, he said. I'll fight the audit. I'll take you to court. Then I'll see you there, I said. I've been in business for 30 years, son. I have documentation for everything. Can you say the same? I said. He couldn't. He knew it. I watched him understand that. He left the room. I heard the two of them upstairs, voices muffled through the ceiling. I picked up my book. I didn't read it. I just held it and breathed. The next 6 weeks were not easy. I want to be honest with you about that, because people tell these stories sometimes and make it sound clean, make it sound like justice snaps into place the way a mousetrap does. It doesn't. There were days I picked up the phone to call Marcus and put it back down. There were nights I sat at that kitchen table with a cup of coffee and asked Carol, out loud, if I was doing the right thing. I never heard an answer, but I never felt like I was wrong, either. The audit turned up exactly what I expected. The financial irregularities were documented, detailed, and damning. Marcus hired an attorney who made some noise for about 3 weeks and then went quiet when Phil responded with the full accounting of every unauthorized expense, complete with dates, amounts, and the paper trail Marcus had carelessly left behind. There was no good defense. What he had done wasn't criminal, but it was exactly the kind of thing that made his argument for contested ownership of the company completely untenable. Marcus and Vanessa moved out on day 41 of the 45. I don't know where they went first. I heard later from Danny that they were renting a condo in Dublin, a nice one, which told me Vanessa's family had stepped in. Gerald helping his daughter, which is, when you think about it, exactly what a father is supposed to do. I don't blame Gerald for that. I do hold him accountable for sitting in a dead woman's chair with a smirk on his face. But that's between him and whatever he answers to. The legal situation resolved over the following months without a courtroom. Marcus eventually dropped the contest when it became clear that the evidence made him look not like a wrong son but like an opportunist who had taken advantage of a grieving father. His attorney, to his credit, probably told him the same thing. Danny took over as operational head of the company. He's done well, better than I expected, actually, and I expected a lot. The business is in good hands. I repainted the living room. I moved the furniture back the way Carol had always had it. I put the recliner in the center. I found a photograph of Carol and me from 1989, back when we had nothing and didn't know it yet, and I put it on the mantle where it belongs. About 3 months after Marcus moved out, I got a voicemail. His voice sounded different. Younger, somehow, or maybe smaller. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he understood now some of it, anyway, and that he didn't expect me to forgive him, but that he wanted me to know he was ashamed. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "I keep thinking about Grandpa, about what you always told me, about watching him shrink. I think I made you feel like that. I'm sorry, Dad." I sat with that voicemail for a long time. I am still sitting with it, if I'm honest. I haven't called him back yet, but I haven't deleted the message either. Here is what I know, and what I want any father or mother listening to me right now to hear. You teach people how to treat you, but that's not a bumper sticker. But that is something I learned the hard way, at 63 years old, sitting on the edge of a bed in my own house, listening to my son's father-in-law laugh in my living room. I had spent 30 years teaching Marcus that I was endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly willing to move to the corner to make room for whatever he needed. I taught him, without meaning to, that I had no edges. He found out I had edges. Carol used to say that love without limits isn't love, it's just fear wearing love's clothes. I think she was right. I was afraid of losing my son, in 18%, so I gave him everything and asked for nothing and called it love. But what I was really doing was making myself small enough that I hoped he'd decide to keep me around. A man who built his business from nothing, who laid carpet and ran wire and climbed into attics in 100-degree heat so his family would never go hungry. That man should never have to be told to watch football in his bedroom. And if he ever is told that, he should know he doesn't have to go. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if Marcus and I find our way back to something real, but I know that whatever we build, if we build anything, it will be built on truth this time. Not on my fear of being alone. Not on his assumption that I will always absorb whatever he dishes out. It will be built the way I built everything else in my life. And, brick by brick. Honestly, that's without cutting corners. I'm not in the kitchen anymore, and I never will be again.